Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You are tuned in to the Skills Development Summit 2022. It has been rocky, it's been riggy, but we still here and we're still talking skills development with regards to employability and entrepreneurship. This is the last, or rather second last panel for the day, and we are discussing learnerships and work integrated learning. We do have a panel of experts that are joining us in this afternoon session to discuss this phenomena. With me, I have Mr. Graham Choice, who's the Managing Director for under the merchandise supply chain at the Foschini Group. We also have Bernadette Isaacs, Managing Director for the South African Furniture Initiative. We also have Dr. Ernest Andreas Hartmann, who is representing the Institute for Innovation and Technology. We also have Professor Parwa Kanyane, Executive Dean under Faculty of Management, Commerce and Law, which is University of Venda. That's what you're representing. We have Associate Professor Sonia Ferns, Managing Partner at Lean Work Consulting and Adjunct Curtin University in Perth, Australia. Welcome to all of you, and thank you very much for your time and for joining us. Maybe we can start with Dr. Ernest. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Perhaps just to introduce myself and the institution I'm representing here. I start my name from education. I'm an industrial psychologist. What I'm doing now, I'm working at the Institute of Innovation and Technology in Berlin, which is part of a larger agency. We're a private company, but we are working on behalf of the German federal government as a program management agency. So what we're doing is we manage programs, innovation programs in traffic and microelectronics and anything. And the department I'm heading is managing programs in education. So for example, we have rather big programs with concerned with the digitization of higher education, digitization of vocational education. And our most important work at the moment is to build up the German National Digital Learning Platform on behalf of the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research. That's perhaps for me and the institution. And if you don't mind, I can also go on and make a few points which I would like to contribute to the issue, or make we first the introduction round?
Yeah, sure. You're more than welcome to, because we'll just pick up right from there.
Okay, then perhaps I start with just a few comments. I think when you invite someone from Germany, you're expecting something, and what you can expect from Germany is some experience with apprenticeships. We have about 800 years of experience with apprenticeships, with industries and companies taking responsibility for vocational education. This is still a very important part of education in Germany, but it has decreased. We have to admit that. Right now, there are more students in higher education than apprentices in Germany. This was the other way around 10 years ago or so. This has, of course, to do with changes in occupation in the labor market. This has also to do with professionalization of some vocational educations, like, for example, nurses. Nurses are still vocationally trained in Germany, as in contrast to other countries. So what's going on now with respect to work integrated learning? Perhaps three things. We have this tradition, it's a very strong tradition of apprenticeship, which has declined a bit, but is still very important. We have still small but rapidly increasing segment of what we call dual study programs. Students in dual study programs are doing both at the same time. They're apprentices at a company and students at a university. So they're doing two tracks of education at the same time, which is of course very demanding, but also a very good preparation for the labor market. And this is, as I said, still small but rapidly expanding. And the third thing I would like to mention refers rather to higher education and continuing education. we are not very good in Germany as compared, for example, with the Scandinavian countries and also the UK in devising work-based forms of continuing education, of education in the universities and higher education. So, for example, things like project-based learning, developing things and learning for your academic studies at the same time. The Danish and the Finnish are very, very good, and we are not yet. We are working on that. But the best places to are, in fact, in Northern Europe, from my point of view. And a last thing I would like to mention is I think there are lots of potentials in using technology, and not only as we use digital communication technology right now for learning, but also to use production technology for learning purposes to build in learning capabilities into production technology. There are some German companies doing some very interesting things on this track to devise industrial machinery as learning instruments at the same time. This is still R&D. This is not very broadly deployed in practice, but it's an interesting prospect for the future. Perhaps these 3 points to start with.
You laid the foundation very well. So thank you, Dr. Ernest. Thank you. Can we have Mr. Choice, and then we'll have Professor Sonia. Mr. Choice, over to you.
I'm the managing director of TFG's merchandise supply chain. Really, what that means is every single thing that comes into TFG Africa, either from China, from India, from our SADC countries or local, comes through our supply chains. The local supply chain is obviously one that is very close to my own heart, and one in which the group has spent an enormous amount of focus, as you've probably read and seen over the last number of years. In 2014, we did about 4 million garments manufactured locally and employed a range of smaller companies. What the group quickly learned was that we don't have the clothing industry, clothing, textile, leather industry, many large factories anymore. And unfortunately, when you do have large companies, they create scale, they create depth, and they create the learning opportunities that the smaller companies don't have. And I've been very fortunate in my journey to be able to prove to the wonderful shareholders of our company and a very supportive board and CEO that when you take a modern piece of sewing equipment and you put it in an advanced methodology in a compliant environment, you don't have to go to Bangladesh, you don't have to go to Vietnam. South African workers can do exactly the same. Specifically those that sometimes coined by government as the unemployable youth. Factories that manufacture apparel love unemployable youth. It means that everybody gets a chance to have some job. If you connect that to a learnership, then all the testing we've done and all the growth we've done over a number of years starts proving that you can go anywhere in South Africa, go to wherever there is a high intensity of unemployment. We chose Caledon, a town 2 hours outside of Cape Town, tiny malting station for SAB, but because of it was surrounded with agriculture, there was a lot of unemployed women. We started with 8 people. Today we have the most advanced t-shirt plant in this country. It produces garments cheaper than China. There's no other factories in that geographic environment where we could draw qualified staff from. So we trained up youth from scratch on our NQF level 2 learnerships in sewing and cutting and finishing. And it's a showpiece. Recently, we went into a place where people wouldn't really think of opening up a clothing factory, but we did it because Hillbrow was actually where modern clothing manufacturing in years gone by originated. And we found a very tiny building. Partnered with Bidvest, asked them if we could have it. They said yes. And in partnership with them, created an extension of that environment. But for this startup little factory, we chose to only employ youth that were deaf. So we partnered with St. Vincent's, the School of Deaf, around the corner from Sandton. They'd seen us at a Proudly South Africa exhibit a couple of years ago. And today there's 125 deaf kids all going through their learnership, but producing beautiful garments that our retailer sells. So maybe just leave it there, Tabang. But I think what I'd like everybody to understand is that the process of not having a learnership, to use the old methodology of training, chuck somebody in a factory and give them 2 weeks on a machine, it's not appropriate anymore. You need that learnership, you need that grounding, you need to tell them and impart the fundamentals, the elective and the core parts of a learnership to somebody that may only have a grade 7. But that 17 or 18-year-old grade 7 gets the picture. She gets the picture after a while, and she integrates much better into our environments.
Absolutely. Sure. That's quite power-packed. I forgot that I'm even facilitating. I was a student there just taking notes. So thank you so much, Mr. Joyce. You've given us a lot to work with. Thank you very much. May I invite Professor Ferns to go ahead, please?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Evening in Perth, Western Australia anyway. I've got a slightly different perspective coming from my background, but hopefully it complements what others have just said. So just a little bit about my background. Probably my most proudest achievement and something that I remain passionate about is my teaching experience, which spans many, many years. And I've taught across all the sectors. But in addition to that, I've led or co-led national projects around work integrated learning and industry engagement. And I've also led institutionally based strategic projects to instill a cultural shift towards teaching and learning, and I've published extensively. At the risk of self-promotion, I do want to talk about a book that I recently published in partnership with co-authors and co-editors, and that outlines what the future should look like with 9 key recommendations for the higher education sector. And I refer to this as a call to action and firmly believe that we need to reframe how education institution and the business sector work together. This perspective is reinforced by peak industry bodies in both countries. I've actually worked with quite a few of colleagues in South Africa and read all your documentation and in touch with all of our peak bodies, and there's lots of synergies. So I think higher education institutions, despite the wealth of expertise, knowledge and teaching capability, cannot achieve employable graduates alone. To ensure currency in programs and accommodate emerging workforce challenges and changes, we need to work hand in hand with our industry and community partners. And partnerships with community organisations, I think, is fundamentally important as well, because that's where we develop the human skills such as creativity, adaptability, resilience and compassion. And interestingly, of course, they are skills highly sought after by employers. While the government in Western Australia in fact, is pushing more and more money towards universities and educational institutions introducing work integrated learning, I think we're hampered by a few things. I think we need more expertise on innovative models of that integration of theory and practice. I think we need to rethink our traditional and long-standing views of partnerships, and we need to change our ineffective leadership models. And I use the terms we and our because it's inclusive of both business and education in an effort to subtly shift the dynamics. I see it as a problem we all share, and it won't go away, and I think it requires a collective and collaborative solution. I think that the employability of students is strengthened through experiential and active, engaging and authentic learning experiences that involves external stakeholders. And it's got to be central to curriculum design, just not a set of skills and attributes that we claim to be inherent in existing learning outcomes. So it's got to be engaged in experiences where our students nurture their professional identities, explore career aspirations and challenge their personal biases and values and reflect on their personal development. To do this, I think we need to rethink our curriculum, reconceptualise what it means and how it's structured. Doesn't compromise discipline knowledge, which is still really important, but allows students to apply that emerging knowledge in increasingly sophisticated ways. Autonomy and student agency should be encouraged to nurture resilience, self-awareness, and that self-regulated learning. which are important attributes in an uncertain world. So I think the most important thing that we need to focus on is that collaboration and cooperation, working with our partners. I think brokering, maintaining and strengthening partnerships is central to achieving real world learning for our students, and in my view, our first and foremost priority. I think that that's what we need to enhance learning and learning outcomes for our students, to strengthen industry outcomes, and to ensure economic national productivity and sustainability. I think that in reading the profiles of presenters at this conference, it seems there is abundant expertise and appetite for curriculum renewal. The challenge for us all globally is to embed that shift in large, often decentralised institutions with sometimes unwieldy administrative processes. So I've tried to be a little bit provocative there, because that's the nature of me.
Thank you. Well, you're well aligned to today's agenda. Being provocative is key, just so that we can stir discussion. So thank you very much for the insight. We look forward to engaging further with you there, Professor Ferns. Let me have Ms. Bernadette Isaacs, and then I'll have Professor Barwa come in thereafter. Bernadette?
Hi, thank you, Tabang, and nice meeting all the fellow panelists. Just as you introduced me, Tabang, I'm Bernadette Isaacs. I'm the Managing Director of the South African Furniture Initiative. We're an industry association for the furniture industry, and we started off as a provincial association in the Western Cape back in 2009. And in 2016, we created the national organization, the South African Furniture Initiative. And always as our objective, even when we were a provincial organization, was actually foremost the organization facilitating training and mentoring and support services for the furniture industry. I've also, just in my previous life, I have a background of human resources and training and development, and I've been on the other end of it in terms of where I worked in a furniture manufacturing company back in 2004, where my partnership and my journey with the FP&M Seta started back in 2004, and the focus being very critical to the development of learnerships and work placement in the organization then. And I was able to take that through when we had the provincial organization in the Western Cape, and now the national organization called SAFI. So we play as SAFI, we play a very critical, important role in connecting the private sector, our members, and the academia institutions in terms of a smooth transition of getting the learners, be it both employed learners and unemployed learners, into the workspace. And key to that, I think, is the connectivity, the platform we provide for both the learners and the employers, in terms of identifying the demand from the industry in terms of what is required from a company organization level, as well as what is being taught or learned at an academic level. And we've done that over the years, and we've also, through the partnership with the FP&M Seta, have project managed and facilitated various programs when it comes to learnerships or work integrated learning placements like internships, in terms of ensuring that those learners that are unemployed specifically, through the engagement and the monitoring and the interaction between both parties, that there has been success stories in terms of permanent employment and placement of those students within the sector and within the whole value chain, actually. Thanks, Tabang.
Thank you very much, Bernadette. Thank you. Looking forward to engaging further as well regarding the initiatives that SAFI is doing. Professor Barwa?
Thank you very much. It's very exciting to hear, these discussions around the work integrated learning. And I just also want to add, parcel on the discussion. Actually, in the university, I grew in the university as a student and also as an academic for about 20 years now. But then I also tasted the research environment at the Human Sciences Research Council for a decade and a year, involved in research, social science research, and more in particularly issues of learnership. I learned to engage more research with our Setas, the local government sector, authorities, bank Setas, all number of Setas that been involved in the learnership programs. But I then, after my research exposures at the Human Sciences Research Council, I then joined back at the university, at the University of Venda, at the far north of South Africa in Limpopo province, actually having a period of seven months at the university. But as an executive dean, my role really is to make sure that the programs that we offer, they are touching base with the realities of the job market. Because at some point, the job market becomes very harsh to our graduates, and some of them we produce, they find themselves on the streets, very unemployed youth. And I think the WIL, the work integrated learning, is kind of an intervention that will bridge that gap of the graduates who are skillful, but they are not absorbed in the job market, more particularly because the nature of the curriculum, the tradition of the curriculum does not accommodate that experiential learning, which is a very critical component of the curriculum. And the theory part of the curriculum, when blended together with the experiential, learning, it brings a type of a skill that is needed in the job market. So currently, where the situation is, especially in South Africa, this work integrated learning is something that is not universalized, and I think that it is important to begin to that. But little steps going through the programs that we are offering in the university. One of them, in the Faculty of Management, Commerce and Law, we're offering programs like BCom Accounting, BCom Tourism, BCom Business Management, and also in the area of law, those LLB programs. But you can able to see that if you want to produce a CA, you then have to integrate the university with the host institutions, like companies that can able to expose our students, and we are trying to bring that link. And then already we are winning. We have some quick wins with the tourism sector because our students are then get exposed to that. But we want to see the whole, the nature of the curriculum started to gain shape to accommodate our students to be absorbed through their experiential learning part of their stay at the university. Then they get absorbed in the workplace, and then they get that critical skill that is very practical. And I think I am a champion to get able to lead in that type of intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Barrow. We look forward to hearing more from you regarding what the University of Venda is doing in relation to work integrated learnerships and so forth. Maybe let's go back to Dr. Ernest. How is your institution or your institute aiding in the digitalization of vocational training? So you created an example earlier on about the difference between the educational aspect and also the more apprenticeship-based kind of skills. How is your institution contributing to the digitalization of that space?
Yes, first I have to say we are not especially linked to the vocational education sector because we work for the German federal government as a whole, and so my department is working in all educational domains, more or less. We have perhaps a focus in higher education, but also in vocational education. And our role is to be program management agency. So what we are doing is we are helping the government to fund projects bringing forward innovation in education. And right at the moment, just to give you some impressions, what's going on, we have one program which is focused on continuing vocational education. So it's not the apprentices, but the gainfully employed people who want to learn in parallel to their occupation, and there we are funding projects setting up new platforms for digital continuing vocational education. And what I mentioned before in my last short contribution, there are also rather advanced examples among that, using technologies like virtual reality or using technologies from Industry 4.0, using sensorics in the industrial machine themselves to use these data and to use these communication for learning purposes. They're talking about the digital triplet. What we have in Industry 4.0 is the digital twin, that you have a digital twin to every physical object you have. And what they are doing, they generate a digital triplet, which is another digital space where people can learn, where they can, for example, simulate what the machinery would do if you would set the settings in such or such a way. So this is a range from rather conventional digital learning environments, like a bit like this one, like seminars, like MOOCs or things like that, going on to very advanced things. Then we have another initiative. It's called Artificial Intelligence in Higher Education. On behalf of the German federal government, there we support higher education institutions, polytechnics and universities to do two things. One thing is to improve their teaching in artificial intelligence, to make better curricula, better courses in artificial intelligence. We also fund the AI campus. That is a central resource. It's a platform where you can access some should be about 100 courses or so at the moment, where you can access digital courses in the domain of artificial intelligence. So this is one strand, has to do with artificial intelligence as a topic, as part of the curriculum. The other part, what we are funding there, is to use artificial intelligence as a means of teaching and as a means of improving teacher behavior. This has to do with the learning analytics, so that you use learner data to give the teacher a feedback, and a much better feedback than they have now, on how their students are performing, where their problems are, what they need as interventions to become better. This is this learning analytics part. And this is all, we are not doing this research ourselves, but we are managing a bigger research program where there are lots of projects developing these new educational offers and technologies as well. And as a last part, and then I better finish, is what we are doing now with the German National Digital Learning Platform. There we have lots of platforms. We are not going to set up a new huge platform. What we rather do is to build up an IT infrastructure which can connect all the platforms which are already there, and which can provide some central services, like, for example, identity. That's single sign-on. You just sign on once, and then you can access all the other platforms. That's one thing. Another thing which is very important is digital credentials. That's a huge topic in Europe, which means that you get your credentials, your diplomas or whatever in a digital way. On the one hand, this is more efficient for the administration. On the other hand, it's also better for the learners to manage all these certificates. And not the least thing is for the employers, they can be sure that they are not faked. There is a problem also in Germany with false certificates. When people apply for a job somewhere, there are estimates that about a quarter of all these certificates are faked. And this is a much more difficult thing to do with the digital credential. And so also this platform will provide a central service for digital credentials, which can be used by all platforms in Germany. And the last issue perhaps would be body funding. So that, for example, if you are a teacher in mathematics in some school and you're trying to improve your lessons, then you might find via the platform another teacher in another city who is doing the same thing, and you can perhaps exchange your experiences and exchange materials and so on. These are just a few examples.
So I see with counterfeit certificates, it's not just a first world problem, it's third world. So you see, there's a lot of first and third world commonalities that we have. I think the world is just the same. So thank you for sharing that. Perhaps, Mr. Choice, you can come in here. And I want to try to rephrase this question in a way that it doesn't sound insensitive. Earlier on in your opening statement, you emphasized the importance of having, work integrated learning programs or learnerships to prepare people for the working environment. Do you think the high unemployment rate that we have is because students, young people, or the people that are usually employed are not really experienced enough to produce the results that industry is looking for?
I think Sonia said it quite well. It's about the public partnership. You've got incredible wealth and brain trust in skills developed in the country. I was a panelist recently, and there were people from Bursa and Medley, the President's Office, and all the seaters. But when you look at that big structure, you look at where's the implementers, where's the people that actually land those programs. There's not a criticism, because I think we all want to do what's good. But when you look at the clothing and textile industry in our country, and you consider that for every clothing worker that you employ, costs around about 48,000 Rand. And for every one of those people, they can support one other in the factory. That's the machine environment that they plug in, the learnership they do. It's one of the cheapest spends to create employment. Secondly, I did mention the unemployable youth, which it suits. And so that talks to that too. I find it unfortunate that too much of the resources that we have, we spend on skills that doesn't really lead to employment. And even though it's critically important that we spend money on supporting higher education skills, some of that resource has got to go to the ground to say, how do you offset that? How do you, TFG specifically has a very clear, defined way of looking at what it's going to spend on creating jobs and why it's creating the jobs. The jobs we're creating is because retail love what we're making, and we're making it at a value and fashion equation that ticks their box. We wouldn't have a retail in Australia, Sonia, and we wouldn't have TFG Europe either if it wasn't for the fact that we have this culture that says we have to get involved in our supply chains. We've got to link our supply chains into our retailers and do that well. What's surprising, it seems, to most South Africans is to actually make unbelievable product here. I said earlier, all there is taking an ordinary South African and providing them with the right skill, the right management, the right process, the right machine. No different to what they do in China and Vietnam. Bangladesh. There's a tendency, because of the cost of employment, to throw people at the problem. But when you look in dollar terms at employment rates in South Africa, it's not high. Our productivity is low. And our productivity is low because we don't spend money on advanced machinery and technology. We don't train effectively. I mean, consider this. Bernadette and I sit both, I'm sure, and I don't know Bernadette, but I'm sure we see the same problem. We both feed off the FP&M Seta. It's the tiniest, but I suggest arguably one of the best run Setas in our country, for
Yes.
an enormous amount of good with a tiny budget. We've got other larger partners that we're working very closely with now, W&R, specifically Tom and his team, which are spending a lot more time with us, looking for those resources. We've got a project currently called Project 3000. We've been doing learnerships in small groupings, in building smaller factories. We've now learned that unless a factory gets to the size of around 200, 250 people, your HR strategy and your manufacturing strategy doesn't tie in. In a micro business, small and medium business, that's challenging. And I argue this because when I started Prestige Clothing, I started with 6 people in 1989. So I was a micro business and a small business and a medium business. So I've done that journey. And the secret about small business succeeding is they've got to get bigger, which means they've got to employ more people. So who's encouraging them? How are we making it easier? And it's not about giving them fish. It's about teaching them to fish. I believe that, in answer to your question once again, you've got to make it fit the South African environment. The South African environment has huge unemployment. They fit in geographic areas where you can't find them. So we've got to open up these 250 man factories in areas as a retailer. Our Project 3000 simply says, we'll employ 3,000 people in the next 3 years. We will build 30 factories. We will build them at a scale on average of around 1 every 2 months. We'll put them where GBV is a huge problem, or where there's a mass of unskilled workers. We're going to grow our footprint from 2 years ago, which was sitting at around about 2,800 people. It's now about 4,000. We're growing it to 11,000, and I made that commitment at Proudly South Africa not so long ago at the presidential conference. But Project 3000 says that 2,200 of those employees are going to have to be learnerships, because the other 800 are unemployed but skilled workers in the city centers where some of our factories reside. So we can draw them in quite easily. Where's the resources to train 2,200 learners in 2 years? We've got the service provider and providers. TFG committed huge resources, but we decided to put it together in a project to say to government, here's a project. We will employ 3,000, help us. We put in a lot of money, we'll put in some more money. And when we get those learnerships, if you really want them to stand a chance, we need a whole program after that. We've tried digital learning, we do that, but we find that unless there is a help desk close by, or at least a human connector from time to time, an entire program done in digital doesn't work for us. We've committed huge funding to the Toyota Vessels Institute of Advanced Manufacturing. We are working on an enormous amount of technology that will enhance our apparel manufacturing and things around it. But for me, the most encouraging thing is that there's no South African that I'm aware of, able or disabled, unemployed or unemployable, that we haven't worked with in rural areas and created a meaningful job and got a meaningful return from.
Sure. Absolutely profound. I think 2 things there. When you said you started in 1989, I thought you were born in 1989. So you look very well for whatever age you're representing. And 2, you're quite right. The digital frustrations are really there. If you walk into a bank and all you see is machines, you become so frustrated. So you're quite right to say that we're not saying digitalization is not critical to a sustainable development and so forth, but it needs to be merged with human capabilities as well. Bernadette, perhaps you can extend on that, and then I will come to you, Professor Ferns, and you, Professor Barra. But I think maybe just linked to what Mr. Choice has said, what are your sentiments in that regard?
A lot of what Graham has said, yes, resonates with the furniture sector. We've always known the clothing and textile sector as our sister sector. In terms of, we're both traditional sectors. In terms of the furniture industry, 90% of our members, manufacturers in the furniture sector, are SMMEs. Only 10% are big corporates. So in terms of the resources available to these SMMEs when it comes to training and development and work integrated learning placements, is that there aren't the similar resources you'd find in your established corporate businesses. And that is where SAFI plays a vital role in terms of being that linkage, being that platform, being that partner, and as Graham mentioned, in terms of the implementers. So to make an example, we would be the platform where a TVET college or university would make contact with SAFI, and we would engage with our members. And as I said, as majority of these members are 90% SMMEs, they don't have the resources that a corporate or a big business would have. So they wouldn't have your traditional HR manager or training manager that could actually help with this. So when it comes to access to information and access to funding and access to all of these things, that makes these learnership or work integrated learning placements possible, that's where we play a role in terms of the bridge between the manufacturers and the TVET colleges or the universities. And as Graham said, that public partnerships is crucial. So we as SAFI liaise at all levels, whether it's at an informal level, we have partnerships with municipalities where we'd go in and play that facilitation and project management role in terms of, you know, how the tools needed and the resources needed to actually make that happen. And we become that voice and that platform for the manufacturing and academic sectors. In terms of the implementation side, I think just in experience over the years working in a furniture manufacturing environment, as well as being the implementers and project managers of projects, and I think all the panelists have touched on it, I think it's vital and crucial in all of this is communication and partnership in ensuring all of this actually happens successfully. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Professor Ferns, maybe you can come in here and with your answer, just integrate what your other colleagues have said. You mentioned about reconceptualizing the curriculum. How do you think we can do that?
Okay, I'm going to frame it within a response to a couple of the things, because I absolutely agree with what people are saying. So firstly, I think Graham highlighted digital, we live with digital and it's a reality of the world. And I think we all get that. Here we are, I'm talking to halfway around the world and we're online. Isn't that amazing? However, education and learning, rich learning, is about a sense of belonging. Oh. And what digital can do, if that's all we rely on, is it compromises that sense of belonging, compromises that community of learners. I'm not saying you can't build it in a digital space, but if we're talking learners who have difficulty for many reasons engaging, which is a South African context, then it's absolutely crucial that we that sense of belonging is important. Now, that sense of belonging and the experiences and the learning needs to be embedded in curriculum. So curriculum needs to be designed in such a way that it's interactive, it's engaging, students have some influence over it, and there's a sense of ownership and agency for students, which is not the traditional model of especially universities. So I think an assessment is key to all of that. How will we do it? How will we do it? First of all, it takes it takes time. It's, you know, what we tend to do is say, we're going to do this. Someone gets funded for 6 months to do it, and then the funding goes away. You don't achieve any real cultural shift in 6 months. So what we need is real shift, a real cultural shift, because we need to give our very valuable, highly skilled staff time to shift their thinking. And it's threatening for them as well. So what do we need? We need inspirational, and charismatic drivers of change, and we need support mechanisms for staff so that they can shift the way they design the curriculum, rethink the way that they build those partnerships that we are at work at one together, and also, reframe their teaching and learning approaches, and see us not as industry as being someone we say, oh, will you take my student on a 3-week placement? Rather, how can we work together to do this? I think institutions also need to reshape curriculum. We've got to be more flexible. We've got very rigid policies and protocols and timing and scheduling. Does that work with industry? Not always. So there's a whole range of things, and I won't take up more time, but I will finish by saying that I think we all recognise that education is highly valued and integral to a productive, safe and moral society. But I just don't think we can do it within the 4 walls of educational institutions only. And I get that a lot of our people from industry here tonight, or this morning, today, have said they're working desperately to try and get a skilled workforce. But they shouldn't be going it alone either. We need to really work collaboratively. And I get there's partnerships happening. I'm not saying none of this is happening. I just think we need to do it better and need to do it more consistently and much more broader.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Professor Barwa, maybe you can come in here. How is university preparing students for the workplace? I mean, Venda is a very seasoned environment, an enabling environment. For apprenticeship one and also for vocational training. But how is university really involved with respect to work integrated learning? How are you preparing the students for the workplace?
Yeah, I think let me take it right there from what Sonia have said, that like as I said initially, that the first point of departure is this, radical shift. I use the word deliberately radical because sometimes we think for the market and prepare the curriculum to respond to the market without engaging with the market. And I think that's where the gap is, because we end up producing graduates which are not so much relevant and fit into those industries. So and as I said, the ball game around this then is the curriculum shift to make sure then that we have, even in the advisory board, we have the members of the corporate to be part of that curriculum development, so that what we come with, it becomes something that has a bridge of the university and also of the industry. You raised issues of apprenticeship, but it is very important that the two institutions, the host institutions and the academic environment, start to integrate. Once that integration happens and it starts working, and that's why for now, the University of Venda, we have a new strategy, and then we have this curriculum where we are now start to engage with the community of practice. Reference is made of the community of practice to have that formalized relationship with the community of practice, so that when we have these program offerings, just give you an example of the tourism sector, which is a very strategic point for the University of Venda, because we are in this economic zone where we find ourselves in a very critical spot to respond as a university. So those students that we produce, they can, through this formalized relationship, they can then be placed in those tourism sectors so that they can be exposed. But this is just part one, a program offering on BCom tourism.
Right.
Looking also in other programs, that's what we are saying. The starting point is a curriculum renewal with with an outfit of an integrated learning through WIL.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we have run out of time, so I'm going to ask you all to give your closing remarks or your final thoughts. I'll start with you, Dr. Ernest. Then I'll come to Mr. Choice. Then we'll have Bernadette, Professor Ferns, and we'll have Bauer.
Yes, I feel really urged to say some things. During the
Now's your
discussion,
time.
during the discussion, I got the impression that you have perhaps the impression of me that I'm someone who is an uncritical advocate of digitization of education. Frankly, I'm not. I'm definitely not. And I will explain why. There is a very good case for digital tools when you can do things with digital tools you can't do without digital tools. For example, in the 90s, we developed an educational simulator for laser welding, and there you could simulate a laser welding machine and could experiment with that. This would not have been viable in the real world because in the simulation, you could, for example, look into the material, which you can't do in the real world. And in the simulation, you could do lots of experiments, which you couldn't do in the real world for economic reasons, because each student would have produced thousands of euro of costs per hour if he would have done this with a real machine. So this is a very good case for digital tools. Another good case for digital tools is when they make pedagogical action more efficient. Because when there is more efficiency, teachers can engage in other things where they are needed as persons and as teachers. For example, I think I'm also an adjunct professor as a second occupation. Most of the time, it's not very efficient to hold lectures. Sometimes it's much more efficient if we have good tools where the students can do this kind of learning themselves. And this gives me the time to make much more valuable things with the students. For example, supervise projects. So, and interact with them in a productive way. And this is the next point which I would like to make, which is very close to what Vocational said, the bridges between industry, between practice and academia. And I think this is the most crucial point. I've also already mentioned project-based learning. And my favorite place in the world where this is done at a very high level is Aalborg in Denmark, where the engineering study programs have 50% of their time, not lectures, not seminars, but projects. And what they are doing there is they're working on real life problems from the local industry. They're improving some production processes in some SMEs, or they're trying to improve some products. I had the opportunity to do something like this myself at the University of Magdeburg, and it was wonderful to see how students work together half a year to produce something. For example, one thing they produced was a playground where grandparents and their grandchildren can play together, can engage in physical activity suitable for both. This was in fact built in the city of Magdeburg, this playground. And to bring this about, students from engineering, from psychology, from health sciences work together to make this. And this is just an example. And I think that this kind of learning in bringing about real products, bringing about real innovation, which is working in reality, this is something which is crucial and which can be the basis of a bridge you were talking about between industry, between reality and research. This bridge has to be specific, concrete. It has to be hands-on. And in projects like this, you can do exactly that, and you can achieve the same level of academic achievement as you can with the traditional forms of academic learning. This has been proved. The University of Aalborg is very small, but 2 years ago, MIT made a study about the top engineering universities in the world, and they were among the top 5. With MIT, with Stanford, with London, Imperial College, this small university, because they have excellent pedagogics. So this I felt urged to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We truly appreciate your contribution. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Dr. Ernest Hartmann from the Institute for Innovation and Technology. Over to you, Mr. Choice.
So, colleagues, that You know, if we're going to address the geographically and socially marginalized in our country, the youth that are there to empower the disadvantaged Africans, so all the upskilling initiatives that we've got that reaches all the way out into rural areas, into the GBD hotspots that we have, this concept, and it's not really a concept, it's a reality that has to work, is this private and public partnership. And kind of leave the panel today, but I just want to share that over a very short period of time, we've been able to integrate with some wonderful individuals that we didn't know existed. We knew the two-seaters that we dealt with, but I've got to meet Sam, the DDG at HET. I've met Carmel in the president's office. I've met Sybil that advises the DG, and those two forces connecting to each other allows us to integrate on a much bigger, broader spectrum and show the opportunities that actually can exist when we start talking together at a much higher and strategic level, both the implementers and the brain trust that we have, and the reorganizing of those resources and reallocating those resources to the priorities. And I know that we have a lot of challenges that we face, but I'm absolutely 100% behind the fact that we're going to make a difference.
Thank you so much. That was Mr. Graham Choice, MD at TFG. Thank you very much for that. Bernadette?
Thank you, Thabang. Just in terms of what I said earlier on, I think it's important that we start at ground level. For one, the furniture sector, you know, traditionally hasn't been a very sexy, attractive sector. So I think awareness and promotion and education at a very early level in terms of the academic space at school level. And I think we talk about work integrated learning at Learnerships, but I think for the furniture sector, just in terms of promoting the furniture sector, it should be a profession of choice. It's not necessarily the case. And I think through what Graham has said in terms of those partnerships, we can start those partnerships at a very, very early stage in the academic space. And like I say, as already at the basic education space, right through to tertiary space. And many of the people employed in our industry are people that actually come through the FET space, the further education training space, where they're actually employable through partnerships with those institutions in that space. Thanks a lot, Thabang.
Thank you very much. That was Ms. Bernadette Isaacs, Managing Director for the South African Furniture Initiative. Thank you very much, Bernadette. We appreciate your insights. Professor Ferns.
Thank you. I've got 3 quick points to make. Firstly, I think talk, and it was related to Bernadette, just related to it. Talk is our operative word. I suggest we do, and we do it as sector-wide, not in little defined. There's some fabulous stuff that happens, but it tends to be in defined pockets. What we're doing is we're preparing our graduates all together for jobs that don't exist, using technology that's not yet invented, and solving problems we don't even know are problems yet. That in itself informs how we should structure our teaching and learning. And I'm also going to connect to something Ernst said about the projects. So that's interdisciplinary projects, which reflects the workplace. So stop segmenting our discipline areas. Everybody needs to have some data analytics expertise, communication. Let's promote that type of learning so we all learn from each other. And finally, I'm going to restate it. Partnerships are pivotal. Deep and enduring partnerships where our resources and expertise are shared with common goals, and there's diversity across our sectors, as we know, across the business and university sector. However, we can leverage that as a strength rather than perceive it as a barrier. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was Associate Professor Sonia Ferns, Managing Partner at LearnWork Consulting. Thank you very much for your contribution on this panel. Professor Barwa?
Thank you very much. I think my parting words is that the work integrated learning should not be left to the passion of the lecturers, left to the passion of the lecturers and their sacrifices. It needs to be institutionalized, and then it also be properly structured and funded, and they need to also be accompanied by that integrated efforts of recalculating a curriculum that is relevant to the job market. These days, we cannot be talking about computer science when we are in a 4R space. We need to be talking the language of a digital society, the machine learning, nanotechnologies, and number of these. So that recalibration of the curriculum will put our graduates at a very good advantage of being absorbed in the job market through experiential learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to say we appreciate your contribution on this panel, and a lot of our participants have engaged, and truly we thank you for your time, and thank you for the contribution that you are making to making this world a better place, add a bit of light, so thank you so much for that. All the best for your endeavors, and please, when we call again, please answer the phone. We need you guys. I mean, this panel was the most amazing that I've had today. So enjoy yourselves, please take good care and keep safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Ciao. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the panel discussion around learnerships and work integrated learning. Please also feel free to post your comments. I hope you are engaging in the chat room. Remember, there's still more prizes to be won. So if you don't talk, you don't get any gifts or any prizes to take home with. So we've got our last panel of the day, which is employability and entrepreneurship. What are the key pillars for economic recovery and reconstruction? And this is what we're talking. And this panel discussion is the most critical because it's going to close off and conclude the entire purpose and gist of the summit, I guess. Stay tuned, and we're definitely going to see you after this.
Our mission is to provide quality accredited training in South Africa across multiple sectors. Our services are relevant to both individuals and industry, from managing and implementing learning programs to business